Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And there's great lost rock albums that I dream of. And a side story to that is there's great lost live albums I dream of. And the reason I say that is because there's a whole bunch of live recordings that we know are in the vault somewhere and still haven't been released. And it's kind of perplexing because, of course, it's been 50, 60, some odd years, 70 years in some cases, that these things have been sitting in the vault and nobody's bothered to dig them out. And all these big festivals, almost all the bands were recorded. And so there's live shows by amazing bands. And then we also have to factor in that a lot of sound men made recordings of shows that they did the sound at that are sitting on these tapes. And they may or may not be aware that there's demand for some of these. For example, Sir Lord Baltimore opened for Black Sabbath in a whole number of shows, and I'm sure the sound men recorded Black Sabbath and perhaps recorded Sir Lord Baltimore. So there may be a Sir Lord Baltimore live tape out there, and it just hasn't seen the light of day, and it's really a shame. And another part of that is the fact that Bill Graham recorded every single show that was ever at the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West. And so he's sitting on a gigantic archive of live recordings of all these very well-known bands and then a lot of obscure bands, because just about anybody who is anybody played the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West in the 60s and 70s. So I drool at the fact that he's got a live archive and nobody's licensed the material, or maybe his estate hasn't released the rights, or maybe it's just complex legally to access these shows. But another aspect of this, which is what I kind of wanted to get into mostly, is the fact that all these large festivals, all these bands were recorded. And so there's live albums by a whole plethora of bands that I, for one, would love to hear. A good example of that is the Marisol Festival in Puerto Rico in 1972. And so far, there was a double live album released from that, and it had a bunch of great bands on it, including Nitzinger. And the Alice Cooper show at Marisol has been released. But the fact is, Billy Joel's very first festival appearance, when his first album had come out, people didn't even know who he was. So that's apparently sitting in the vaults. There's a live set by Pot Liquor. A lot of people don't really care about that band that much, but I'm sure a live record by them would have to be stunning. Their studio records were okay, but I'm sure they were a great live act. And then if they have one track by Nitzinger that was released, they probably have a whole set by Nitzinger, and that would also be awesome to see. They had some good material on their studio albums, and I'd love to hear a whole live set by Nitzinger. And then Cactus played at Marisol in '72, so that would have been the second version of Cactus with Peter French on vocals and Werner Fritzings on guitar. And of course, we have live material from them. Half of their Hot and Sweaty album is that version of Cactus, so that's out there. But the one that really gets me is Bang, the proto metal band from Philadelphia that recorded a couple records in '72, '73, and '74. And I would be blown away to hear a live set by Bang. So apparently that's sitting in the vaults. And then there's the Fun City Festival in 1972 in the UK. And I've heard discussions that they recorded all the bands that played at that show, and that there's negotiations going on for some of that to be released. But incredible lineup: MC5, Pretty Things, Kevin Ayers, Peter Took's Shagrat with Larry Wallis, Mungo Jerry, Mighty Baby, the Pink Fairies, and the Edgar Broughton Band. So I drool at the fact that do they actually have soundboard live recordings of all those bands from 1972 at Fun City? Just boggles the mind. I know there's a MC5 bootleg from Fun City, and it's not very good sound quality, but it's a great era for the band. They were doing material from their third album, High Time. That would be amazing to hear. And then the Mac Daddy of all these festivals, and once again, we know a lot of this stuff was recorded, was the Atlanta Pop Festival in 1970. So there's, of course, the Atlanta Pop Festival 1970 live album that has a lot of the big bands on it. There's a great set by Cactus from that show. But Hampton Grease Band played. I actually have a bootleg of Hampton Grease Band soundboard of them playing the Atlanta Pop Festival in 1970. So it kind of verifies the fact that all these bands were recorded and there's live sets by all of them out there. I mean, fuck, if there's a Hampton Grease Band soundboard from that show, I would have to imagine that all these bands are sitting in the vaults with soundboard live recordings. And the lineup of the bands, there's a whole bunch of bands that played that festival that weren't in the official roster. And so there's a lot of big bands that are well known that played that festival. But there's a whole bunch of other bands. It just blows my mind to think that there's soundboard live recordings of all the sets of these other bands that played the Atlanta Pop Festival in 1970. One of the main ones, Captain Beefheart. Imagine having a soundboard recording of Captain Beefheart in 1970. Just mind-boggling. And then Savage Grace, who are a Detroit band, their live sets were incredible. Cactus played that festival, as I mentioned. Blood Rock, live set from Blood Rock. Hampton Grease Band, which I mentioned. Grand Funk played that festival. Can't have too many live recordings of Grand Funk, particularly in 1970. Johnny Winter and did a live set at that show. Mott the Hoople did a live set at that show. Terry Reid did a live set at that show. And then one of my favorites that I would love to hear a soundboard live recording of is the Bob Seger System played the Atlanta Pop Festival in 1970. So as I mentioned, it's already been many decades. How long is it going to take to get all these live recordings that are sitting in the vaults out there for people to hear? I hope it doesn't take too many years, because I'll be dead, and I don't want this stuff to come out after I'm dead, because then I'll never hear it. But wow, it's just hard to imagine that in this day and age there's still all kinds of live shows like that sitting in the vaults, and I think it's time somebody out there put some pressure on these people. I remember hearing about Bill Graham's archive for many years, and it's just stunning to me that some kind of licensing deal hasn't been set up to release all kinds of great live stuff from the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West. I can't even imagine what the roster of bands would be, but obviously bands like Blue Cheer played at the Fillmore, and boy, wouldn't it be great to have a soundboard live recording of Blue Cheer in 1968. The list goes on. I don't even want to think about that anymore, so I'm going to stop. But wow, live recordings out there buried in the vaults for decades. Where are they? I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.